Good evening, everybody.
Well, I think we'll start the presentation now. It's 6 o'clock. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Preparing to Deliver the Construction and BSc Level 3 Qualification webinar. Thank you all for joining us. We hope you find this session helpful. I'm David Pye, Technical Advisor for BSc, and I'm joined by Jason Howe, the Technical Advisor for Construction. We are presenting this webinar from home, so please excuse any unwanted background noise or any delay in the slides. To engage with the webinar, please type your questions in the Questions tab. The main presentation is likely to take around 20 to 30 minutes, which should allow plenty of time to answer the questions following the slide. We have a survey which will drop into the chat function now. Please access the chat and follow the link to show your feedback and thoughts. Now I'd like to hand you over to my colleague Jason, who'll take you through the next few slides. Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, David. I've just noticed as well we have a hand up. We're not taking people off mute today, we can't. So if you do have any questions, please put them in the Questions tab. And as David mentioned, we will strive to answer those at the end of the webinar. So good evening, everybody. Just to give a touch to the webinar today, I'm just going to go over a loose agenda. So I'll introduce you to the team that's supporting the Qualification in Wales project around construction and BSc from City and Guilds. Then we'll just touch on why the transformation, and it's important that we touch on that just so that we cover all bases so people understand why the reform has come about and why the qualifications have been transformed into what they now are. Then we'll touch on the level 3 qualification and the content, and finally looking at the summary of the assessment. Following on from that, we'll then look at the employee confirmation guide and where that sits within the apprenticeship framework and within the process, and then finally looking at some next steps, and then taking your questions, and we'll provide the answers as best we can today. And anything we can't answer, we will follow up following the webinar today, and we will develop an FAQ following today's webinar as well. So just a round of introductions. As David mentioned, my name is Jason Howe. I'm a technical advisor for City and Guilds for Construction. David Pye, my colleague, is a technical advisor for BSc and a lead technical advisor at City and Guilds. And we're usually accompanied by our colleague Ian Roberts, who is a technical advisor for construction at City and Guilds. Also, unfortunately, Ian can't be with us at the minute, so apologies on his behalf, and also apologies on behalf of Anne Harrod as well, who is our policy stakeholder and partnership manager at City and Guilds, and who's played such a vital role in the Skills for Wales Qualifications in Wales project here at City and Guilds. So that's the sort of team, the construction and BSc team, if you like. We're just going to move it on now and just touch briefly on why the transformation came about. So there was a sector review, and following that, Qualification Wales identified that there were some inconsistencies in assessment practices in previous qualifications and frameworks. Some areas of learning weren't effectively assessed enough, and learners were needing to deal with a range of tasks and problem solving. And what they found was the framework and the qualifications that existed previously weren't really meeting the skills needs for Wales. So what they wanted to do as well was reduce the complexity of the system and the number of qualifications, and in ways also improving coherence with absolute clear pathways for progression. Progression routes, they wanted those as well to be clear through a framework and then onto work or HE, and hopefully you'll see that through the qualifications that we have at foundation, progression, and then level 3. And they wanted the qualifications to be portable as well, not just within Wales, but also beyond. And that's what we believe that these qualifications now do. So just looking at the qualifications, to give a bit of an overview of how they sit. So as I mentioned previously, we have the foundation and the progression, and I'll touch on that slightly in a minute. Just wanting to focus on the level 3 construction qualifications as on screen there. Our colleagues at EAL, they do cover the BSc ones for the level 3 apprenticeships. But for construction, those are the pathways that we have set out for the construction qualifications, so dry lining, roofing, civil ops, plant, brick, architectural joinery, site carpentry, timber frame erection, paint and decorating, wall and floor tiling, and solid plastering. So that covers most, if not all, the bases for construction. Just going back slightly, we do also have the foundation and the progression qualifications. Now, those are the qualifications that learners will do when they attend college on full-time programs. So, you know, hopefully before they get apprenticeships, etc. So those are the two qualifications they would do, and they progress fantastically well. So learners could or should start on the foundation, progressing onto the progression qualification, and then finally onto the level 3. And what these do, these qualifications do blend naturally together. So if a learner completes the foundation, all of their learning and assessment is naturally APL'd into the progression and then again onto the level 3. So it all sits nicely together. There is also a core qualification. Now, the core qualification is the foundation qualification, except learners only do one of the occupational pathways, and they do that in line with their level 3. And they have to do the core as a mandatory part of the level 3 qualification if they haven't already done the foundation. So if you've taken a learner straight from school and they haven't done the foundation qualification, learners will need to sit the core, but in one chosen trade pathway. So I hope that sort of just gives an overview and simplifies it slightly for you. So moving on to how it's assessed. So as with the majority of qualifications now, there's 3 methods of assessment that form this qualification. We start with an on-screen assessment, which is a multi-choice question paper. And we have 2 tests in that, test 1 and test 2. And there's 44 to 45 questions, and it will take roughly around 70 minutes for learners to complete. These are externally set by ourselves at City and Guilds and colleagues at EAL and automatically marked online. The results are received by the centre the same day, but it is just a provisional result, as we at City and Guilds will issue the final result following a moderation process. The recognition of prior achievement can be gained for test 1. So this is what I was mentioning earlier. If a learner has done the progression qualification in the same trade as they're doing the level 3, they can be exempt from test 1, but only if they've done the progression qualification, which I mentioned earlier. And this assessment has a weighting of 20% against the overall qualification. Then we move on to the practical project. So these are the work-based tasks that they do out in the workplace. And what the centre will do is they will collaborate very closely with you to agree which tasks those are going to be. They are internally marked by the centre assessors, but they are subject to our external verification. So our EVs, external quality assurers, will verify that process. Provisional marks are awarded, following obviously the internal assessment, but again, City and Guilds will issue the final grade. And this assessment has a weighting of 60%. Lastly, in this process, you have the professional discussion, and there is a sequence as to how these are taken, and the professional discussion has to be taken after the project because the project does form part of it. This is conducted by an external assessor, which will be set by City and Guilds, and it is carried out in one timed sitting. So that will be arranged between the assessor and the learner and you as employers. And the external assessor will be occupational competent. So if they're doing bricklaying, they will be a bricklayer. The units covered in the professional discussion are also outlined in the qualification handbook, and we're going to share with you some links today where all of this information is contained on the Skills for Wales website. If you do struggle to find anything, please just let us know and we will try and support you with locating anything that you're looking for. Again, as mentioned previously, the professional discussion can only take place once the learner has completed the practical project, and also their employer confirmation, which has to be done prior to the assessments taking place. And the professional discussion does have a weighting of 20%. Looking again, just to touch on a few more, we do have the employee confirmation guides. We do have the employee confirmation, and this provides guidance to employers and training providers on how the occupational competency statements set by industry have been met by the learner and by you as employers. And all mandatory sections of the employer confirmation guide must be complete. And it has to be complete prior to the booking of the professional discussion, but it is advisable that it is complete prior to any of the assessments taking place. And this supports the learner in applying for their relevant competency cards, because this is the evidence base that they will need to obtain one of those competency cards. The qualification overall is graded a pass, merit or distinction, and provisional grades for the practical will undergo both within the colleges and within your training providers. They will undergo internal quality assurance, and as mentioned previously, we will externally quality assure them or externally verify them. So you may hear terms like that, and they essentially mean the same thing. External quality assurance and external verification is the same thing essentially. It's just EQA is the new terminology and the new wording around that. The professional discussion, again, will be conducted by the external assessor, and they will confirm the grade on that. And then the final grade overall will be issued by Sitting Guilds for Construction and colleagues at EAL for BSc. If a learner fails to successfully complete one of the components, they are permitted to resit or resubmit. If a learner is required to resit or resubmit any of the assessments, we will always provide some feedback and support to enable them to either fix what they need to or further develop certain knowledge or skills or whatever it may be. And it's advised that the learner does that within an appropriate time frame so that they are then ready for a reassessment when needed. But guidance on the resubmissions and resits is all found in the assessment pack, and we'll try and put the link to that in the chat. If not, it will be on the slide deck, which will be available after today's webinar. Just some additional vocational skills. These are optional, but they focus around heritage, which is such a key component in Wales. Now, the units highlighted in red are not included in the current occupational competency statements, but all the other units highlighted are, but again, these are all optional, and the units are located within the pathway or the heritage suite as well. If you were to do those, the units that have been added are in the employee confirmation guides, but again, they will be optional. If you wish for your learners and your employee apprentices to do them, they are available. And as with the employee confirmation guide, you will record the activities carried out in line with the competency statements or the national occupational statements as well. So that's kind of the assessments in a nutshell. We are going to touch on the employee confirmation guide now. I'm going to hand you back over to my colleague David Pye, who's going to take you through the next set of slides. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Jason, and hello again, everyone. So we'll start looking at the employer confirmation guide. Next slide, please, Jason. Thank you. So the employers will have an enhanced role in the delivery of the new apprenticeship qualifications, and that's really in the role of the employer confirmation sign-off. So this will provide centres and the trade bodies with the assurance that the candidate is occupationally proficient and has covered the full range of relevant standards. And we'll see what those standards are in the coming slides. Alongside that, there'll also be a collection of evidence, and the employer will be checking that this evidence is valid, and we'll also need an audit trail to support the employer decision. And again, we've got a couple of examples of how that may look. There is lots more information on these in the welcome pack, and you can download the confirmation guides from the Skills for Wales website. And next slide, please, Jason. So here's an overview of the confirmation guide that leads towards the professional discussion, which is part of the end assessment. The professional discussion is the independent part of the assessment. So the employer role within this is working alongside the learners throughout their apprenticeship. As the apprentices work, they will log what they're doing in line with the national standards, which are listed on the confirmation guide, which we will show you. Then at appropriate time, the employers will confirm the type of work and that they've met the standard expected for the trade. And this is done by completing the confirmation sign-off. On successful completion, the learners will be entered for the professional discussion once they've completed the project and completed the sign-off. So the centres will have a role, but this will be working with you as the employers just to help you and guide you through this confirmation guide. So as we look at the 8-step guide in a moment, you'll see where you'll have some support. So the awarding body then will ensure work-based learning providers have suitable processes in place. So we won't be checking the evidence as such, we'll be checking you've got processes in place to carry out the confirmation guide. So next slide, please, Jason. Thanks, Jason. So on this next slide, we can see just the overview of the confirmation guide, the document, how it looks. But as we work through the next slides, you'll see in a bit more detail. So next slide, please. So here we have Form A, and Section 1 is completed by the candidate at the start of the apprenticeship. So as you can see, it's just the normal details you'd expect on a form such as this, the name, the registration number, qualification title, and the centre name. Section 2 of that is the overview of the sections which are ticked and signed by the employer when they've satisfactorily been met within Form B. So let's have a look at Form B now. Oh, thanks, Jason. Didn't know that extra bit was coming up, but that's the bit that is completed at the end across the employers. And we've got an exemplar of these in a couple of slides, so it'll bring it to life a little bit more. So here we have Form B, and it's a list of occupational standards there on the left. So things like tape and joint by a mechanical method, form internal and external angles. So the employer will complete when the learner has met the required national industry standard. And at this point, it's just a check. And Form B continued, as you can see on the bottom right-hand corner. This is where the employer will complete the company name, employee name, and so on. So we know who is signing these documents off. And next slide, please, Jason. So to support the employer sign-off is a summary of evidence or documented evidence that the learner will put to support what has been signed. So a couple of points here for you as employers. We should only really be signing off or ticking boxes once we're satisfied the learner is consistently working at or above the criteria set out in the occupational competence statement. So as an example, using my trade as an example, plumbing, if I'm working with an apprentice, they may be installing some radiators, but only part of it, I'm keeping a very close eye on them. It may be that I'm not too happy with how they've done it and I have to tinker with it a little bit, maybe add a couple of clips and keep an eye on it and check the joints and tighten them up. But over a period of time, they become more comfortable with that, where they're consistently working at that criteria that is expected, and they can install the pipe work and check their own joints and clip it all sufficiently themselves. At that moment in time is when you will tick off to say, yes, I'm now comfortable with that. So it's not as if they've done it for the first time and tick it. We need to be comfortable with them. So the evidence will typically contain 15 pieces of evidence, and there's a variety of methods that can be used as evidence. There's no fixed or set way. There's no definitive 15 pieces, 20 pieces, or 10. You can have maybe 30 very small pieces of evidence or 15 larger pieces of evidence, and it can take up various different forms. Some of them being natural workplace documentation that exists anyway, which is brilliant evidence. Can be some photographs or some video clips, which we actually recommend now. It's a very modern and excellent way of providing evidence alongside a site diary, employer contributions, and so on. We just need to check that these are valid pieces of evidence to support what the employer is signing off. So as the learner completes that evidence, the employer, yourselves, will be just making some checks. Yes, you did do that work, and so on. So as we go on to the next slide, Jason, well, I'll just point you towards some of the steps that we've put together here, but one of the following slides will show some examples of how we're suggesting employers and the candidates may produce that evidence. But I'll not talk you through every single step here, but there's a couple I think I'll point out. The step 2, providers meet with the employer to identify a range of tasks required to meet the industry competency statements and the work-based project. So at that time, you'll be getting support as employers into what is expected as that candidate throughout that apprenticeship. That should happen at the very early stages in the early meetings. Step 4, I'll jump a couple, periodic reviews. So we're checking that the learner is on track. If they're on a 3-year programme, you'd expect them to be at a certain stage within the first 12 months. So there'll be periodic reviews by the providers, and the time may vary slightly. They may be much more frequent than that. And the provider and the employer will work together in the interest of supporting that candidate. Step 6, the final review meeting at this stage is nearing the latter stages of the apprenticeship, and the learner should have met by that stage, albeit very close to meeting all the requirements of the confirmation sign-off. And if there are any gaps, they'll need to then complete some of those gaps. And at that stage, they can then progress on to the professional discussion. Thank you, Jason. If we take a look at the next slide. So here's some examples of the form being completed. They are editable on PDF as a PDF form, so you can go into there and type responses and they can be shared. So simply on this one, we've given an apprentice name. These aren't real candidates, so we've just made these up for the purpose of showing an exemplar. And beneath it, where they ticked off. Now this one, we've shown a couple of employer initials because it may be that the apprentice hasn't worked with the same employer or responsible person throughout that apprenticeship. Maybe 2, 3, possibly even more who are signing it off. And that's fine as long as that's documented. So we're just trying to show that on this here. Thank you, Jason. So here's a couple of examples of evidence. So what we're looking for really is we're not looking for masses and masses of evidence. We don't want very large lever arch files full of bits of evidence. We want it to be of high quality, really good quality. It needs to support the statements, but ideally we need to approach it in a more modern way. And we're kind of suggesting there an apprentice diary. As we showed you on one of the previous slides, there's various methods that can be used. So feel free to use a variety of methods as an employer and as a candidate. But a simple apprentice diary with a list of dates, some addresses, just an outline of what he's done, supported by a video. That video may be just a few minutes at the start, 5 minutes in the middle, and a couple of minutes at the end. If it's a full day's job, you don't need the video on all day. Maybe just snapshots on video of certain things. And this is excellent evidence to support a task that the learner is doing. If they're wearing all the safety equipment, following guidance from documents, they're not just signing off and supporting the sign-off of plastering a wall, they're also signing off various other things as part of that. So that's a really modern method and a good way of supporting the learner. On the right-hand side, we've got another learner, and they've done it slightly differently, but they've still got the address, an outline of the task, but they've used some photographs rather than a short video. And then the second piece of evidence, what they've got is a link to a video. So they've not inserted the video onto the diary, but it's a link to a video that may be held elsewhere. And what they've done is they've listed, time-stamped that video. So prep is at 1 minute, plastering the wall is at 2 to 4 minutes, and there'll be pauses in between this, plastering the ceiling at 4 to 6 minutes, and another video link for that section. So hopefully this gives you some ideas of how the evidence may be brought together. So we are looking at hopefully encouraging employers and candidates to use some of these modern methods, so it's not as heavy and there's not as many documents to work with. It will reduce the amount of documents that you're working with. Next slide, please, Jason. Okay, and then section 3, completed by the employers and the IQA from the centre when the learner's completed all the statements. So again, we've just shown here how the different companies and different employees who may be signing off that learner. It doesn't matter as long as they're signed and documented. It gives the opportunity to use more than one employer for learners moved around, or working with different responsible people within the same employment. And at the bottom there, you can see Wales Training Plastering Centre, just a made-up name. Paul Moriarty being the IQA. So I should say IQA. We'll change that document. Okay, next slide, please, Jason. Okay, thank you very much for that. I'll now hand you back over to my colleague Jason to take you through the final few slides. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, David. Apologies. Yeah, so we're just going to have a look at the next steps now on what we need to do moving forward and where you can find a lot of this information before we move on to answer any questions. So as I mentioned earlier, the Skills for Wales website is where all of our information is housed, and the link on the screen there will take you to it. So when you get this presentation, please just follow the link, and all of the information should be on there under the qualifications section, including all of the qualification documents such as the assessment packs, the qualification handbooks, and the employee confirmation guide for each of the trades within the apprenticeship. And again, that is all on our Skills for Wales website. If you haven't already paid it a visit yet, certainly advise that you start having a look, just a quick look on, have a look at the level 3 qualifications and start to familiarise yourself where some of the information is located. And again, if you get stuck with anything, please just let us know, and we'll try our best to help navigate you around the website. So just to have a look at how learners will transition. So this is, I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. So from September 2022, obviously the new level 3 qualifications are introduced. Now you can have direct entry learners on that, and that is the bottom of the 5 vertical lines, if you like, which highlights the core and the apprenticeship in brackets new. So that's a learner who's entering apprenticeship without any prior achievement of any construction qualifications on the foundation or progression. So they would ultimately do the core and do their level 3, as I mentioned earlier. If a learner, and obviously that would take the learner 3.5, 4 years, however long it takes, the duration of the apprenticeship is agreed between yourselves as employers and the providers that you work with. If a learner has done a foundation, obviously the foundation qualifications, so obviously they would be exempt from the core. So that would ultimately reduce the time that the learner is expected to be on that apprenticeship, and it would certainly reduce the number of assessments that's required, obviously, because learners would not be subject to the core qualification as part of the apprenticeship framework. If a learner has done the foundation and progression, again, the duration of the apprenticeship may be reduced, but again, any durations on apprenticeships are agreed between the employer and the provider. We would never get involved in that side of things. But again, if they've previously done the foundation, they're exempt from the core, and if they've successfully completed the progression, then they're exempt from test 1 of the 2 multi-choice question assessments. So this just again shows how a learner can progress and how the qualifications all naturally map and flow into each other. So, this is a fantastic model for the delivery of qualifications for both full-time and apprentice learners, and that transition from full-time courses into apprenticeship, they really have got this model absolutely spot on, as opposed to previous models that we may have had. So that just gives a bit of an overview of any transition that a learner may make through the qualifications and onto apprenticeships. What have we got coming up? So again, on our Skills for Wales website, we always have our training and our events on there. So myself, David, and colleagues Ian and Hannah have delivered a range of events over the past year, and now we're back face-to-face, which is fantastic. So it's been great engaging with our centres face-to-face and supporting them directly, and we'll be looking to return to that model in September as well. So we've put out a support plan ready for September and for the next academic year, and that's on the Skills for Wales website also. But we also have another round of webinars coming up. So we're delivering webinars to support employers and providers with regards to the new level 3 qualifications. So if you're registered for multiple, for example, if you're registered for the webinar on Wednesday, just be mindful that it is a repeat. So it's like ITV +1, if you like. So we will be repeating it on Wednesday, so there's no need for you to attend unless you may have some additional questions that you've maybe thought of over the previous days, and you may want to jump on just to ask a question. That's absolutely fine, and please feel free to do that. Or you can just ping us an email and get in touch with us, or you can get in touch with us via the Skills for Wales website, where you can post any questions on there, and our customer service teams will be more than happy to support you with any questions that you may have. But also, just to make you aware that our providers are also getting a series of webinars delivered to them, again focusing on the level 3, and we will be starting the support plan from September, which is quite comprehensive, and it also, a bit like the evidence in the portfolio or in the documented evidence, it's a range of support methods. So, you know, from keeping in touch surgeries, where we'll be in centres, and these centres can come and visit us, ask any questions, quite informal. We'll be doing again rounds of webinars, but we've also got some new videos that we'll be launching in and around December as well, which is focusing on the 8-step guide. And then after the Christmas break into the new year, we will be starting our CPD events again, and then again followed by more webinars if needed, some keep in touch virtual networks as well. And following on from that, we may do some more face-to-face events if it's warranted. So that's all the events we've got coming up so far. We've now got time to take some questions. I don't know if there's any questions in the question tab, David, that we haven't covered.
There's a couple coming up, so we can cover those, no problem. The first couple I've tried to respond, but I'll also try and explain as well. So it seems to be a question around sort of more about employment law and employing apprentices and pay. So we wouldn't really get involved in that side of things. It may be that centres themselves with their work-based learning departments may be able to better guide you on the approach to employing an apprentice in the days in college and so on. So that would probably be my advice on the first step to looking into employing an apprentice. So the next one. Will there be a pro forma of evidence portfolio supplied by City and Guilds? No, there's no plans to do that currently, because as you see from the slide, there are numerous methods of obtaining evidence. So one of the challenges with having a pro forma is that everyone kind of produces the same each time, or it guides learners and candidates towards using the same. And we want the candidates and the employers, yourselves, to have the various options to gather that evidence. And using the exemplars hopefully gives you a couple of ideas of how that may be approached. Another question is, what happens if a learner can't get the relevant evidence to complete the full level 3 qualification? Do they get a level 2 qualification? No, there is no sort of a separate level 2 qualification. The structure is a foundation qualification, a progression qualification, these are for full-time learners, and the apprenticeship qualification is at level 3. So to complete the apprenticeship qualification at level 3, the range of activities and learning and the project and professional discussion will all have to be completed. So hopefully that answers those questions so far. If there's any further questions or anything you could add, Jason?
Yeah, just on that last point there, regarding if the learners can't get the relevant evidence. That's why the employee confirmation guide is set up, so that learners can utilise a multiple of employees if needed to gain that experience and get the evidence. Obviously, the centre is probably going to act as a bit of a go-between in that process, but certainly it can be allowed where a learner can spend some time with another employer in order to gain that evidence as well. So hopefully that it just gives that learner the exposure to the range of activities that they need in order to complete the employee confirmation guide, and then ultimately onto the assessments. So just add that on there. We do have some questions that we've kind of not set ourselves, but through different sorts of forms of feedback, we have sort of posed some a short series of questions which may hopefully will help the process as well. So we'll kind of just go through them one by one, if you like. So does the employer have to be a qualified assessor? No, essentially, as the employer, you're confirming that the learner is proficient and consistently working at good industry standards. You are not marking or assessing against any assessment criteria. This is, in essence, an opinion, not a judgment or a justification on a grade or assessment. Do we have to check the employer is qualified? So this may be something that a centre may ask. There is no requirement to check that an employer is qualified. Obviously, we'd expect the employers to be certainly experienced enough in order to undertake an apprentice and have them working with them so they can support the learning and the development of that apprentice. But certainly no centres won't be checking if employers are qualified. Is there an NVQ? There's no NVQ within the new suite of construction qualifications, but it is important to recognise that NVQs are still there for learners who may be more experienced in life, should we say, adult learners who want to go down what we used to call the OSAP route. So there will be an NVQ available for learners who wish to adult learners who wish to do that as part of their development and process to become vocationally competent, people who may not be suitable for an apprenticeship. How much evidence is needed? So we've mentioned this previously. It's typically 15 pieces, but as David mentioned, it's all about quality, not quantity, essentially. So if you've got some good holistic evidence in there with videos and photos, etc., it might only be 10 pieces. It depends on, how strong that evidence is. Depends on how much evidence will need to be supplied. It could be that the evidence is slightly weaker, so the learner may need more than 15. It's typically 15 pieces. So please don't sort of hang your hat on 15 pieces of evidence. Is the employer sign-off part of the qualification? So no, it's not. The employer confirmation guide isn't a part of the qualification, but it just allows the learner to apply for and attain their competency card with CSCS, which I think is just one of the questions that's come in. So on this new suite of qualification, is there scope for learners who pass the level 3 qualification to apply for their CSCS card? So yeah, to pass the level 3, ultimately they will have done the employer confirmation guide, and the employer sign off as part of that process is what learners need in order to apply for and obtain their competency card or CSCS card. So hopefully that answers your question there. Is the evidence IQA'd? So working in collaboration with the employer, the IQA will check there's sufficient evidence. So they're not second assessing, they're just checking, I think as David mentioned earlier, that the assessment process has been followed and the evidence allows the learner to proceed to their final assessment, i.e. the professional discussion and or the practical project. So that's what it's designed for with regards to the IQA process. It is not second assessing any work. When can evidence gathering commence? So compiling the evidence or the apprentice's portfolio or documented evidence, because we're going to try and lose the word portfolio because we want to get away from that stigma. We want to call it documented evidence as opposed to having, as David mentioned, a lever arch file full of evidence. So that should only start once the employer is satisfied that and maybe the assessor has input in this as well, is that, collectively everybody is in agreement that the apprentice is consistently working at or above the criteria set out in the occupational competency statement. So once the learner is at that stage and continuously working at that level, then the evidence gathering should start and commence. But what we also would say as well is please don't miss an opportunity to gather that evidence as well, because again, the industry is so diverse and there's no guarantees of what work is around the corner. So please don't miss any opportunities to get any of the required evidence. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question as well. There doesn't seem to be anything else in the chat. We can hold on a bit longer, but appreciate it.
There's a couple of questions, Jason, if that's okay.
Yes, no problem.
So there's a question from an employer about current apprentices only attend 1 day a week. With this new qualification, will they need to attend college more frequently, I think is the query, because we have foundation and progression and so on. I've tried to answer it typing out, but if a learner starts, say, straight from school and hasn't done the foundation or progression, they'll have 2 qualifications to do. The core, which is the same as the foundation, but only a single trade. So it's a reduced version of the foundation, if you like. They wouldn't do the progression, they'd just do the level 3 apprenticeship qualification. Now, there will be crossover in the content, but you wouldn't register them on 3 separate qualifications, just 2, the core and the apprenticeship. The centres may decide to run the core first and then move on to the level 3 apprenticeship qualification, or they may do half a day on each. I suspect it will remain a single day, but that would be between yourselves as employers and the centres to look at how that is best done. But you know, there is guided learning hours in the qualifications, which give a guide as to how many hours. But you know, because learners are getting experiences on site, in my experience of working on site and delivery of the qualifications, is that some learners will progress much more quickly. If a learner's done the foundation, left school maybe, done the foundation qualification and the progression qualification, and then gains an apprenticeship, that will then reduce how much time they have on the apprenticeship, because they won't have to do the core and they won't have to do the early stages of the apprenticeship qualification, because if I had the delivery, they're also exempt from one of the exams, I think it was, that Jason mentioned earlier in the slides. So hopefully that answers that. We've worked with this for a while now, so it's easier for us to have a picture of how that works. But I agree, when you first look at it, it just takes a little bit of time to absorb it and understand how it entwines. And the second question is, on this new suite of qualifications, is there scope for learners who pass the level 3 qualification to apply for the CSCS cards? Yes, I mean, one of the reasons for the employer confirmation sign-off is for the CSCS cards, we need to demonstrate that the learner has those experiences and is proficient in that range of standards for that industry. So that's pretty much the one of the main reasons for including that employer sign-off. So learners will be able to apply for the CSCS card on completion of this apprenticeship. Will centre assessors be visiting our learners on site to conduct observation? Not in the typical sense that you're used to, because the employer sign-off is really between the employer and the candidate. So you as the employer will be signing off to say, yes, I'm comfortable that this learner has met the industry standards that I expect as an employer. There is a project at the end of the apprenticeship, and that project is an assessment, and that assessment is taking place on site. So assessors from the college will be coming to site at the end of the apprenticeship to complete the project assessment. So the journey, as we used to with the MBQ portfolio, assessors will be coming out as part of that journey. Now the journey belongs to yourselves and the candidate, and when we're comfortable that the learner's met the requirements to enter into the project, they'll then do the project at the end, and there will be some assessment from the college at that point. I hope that sort of answers your questions. It's a bit of a, not as you see currently, but yes, in a different form. If there's any other questions, please type away. We'll try and answer as many as we can. If you think of any afterwards, there is a feedback form that we've dropped in the chat. What I'll do now is if I can copy that as well, and I'll put it against one of those questions. Just bear with me a moment, because I think you know, it's useful to gather your feedback. You know, it's really helpful. And also, if you think of other questions, you can drop it into the feedback form. You know, you can put in there if you think of it afterwards. There's also a Skills for Wales email address. We can find that for you now and drop that in. So you have that email address as well if you have any further questions. So will we be getting the evidence requirements for the work activities from the college? In terms of what you need to do, it would be on that employer sign-off. So in the early stages of the apprenticeship, when you meet with the college, I know colleges do it slightly differently, but if I can draw on my own experiences, we would have employer liaison officers who would go out and do the initial sign-ups, talk about what is required as part of the apprenticeship and so on. So most colleges use something similar. It's at that stage, it's probably most appropriate to introduce you as the employer to the sign-off document. It's also on the Skills for Wales website, and it's not password protected, so anyone can get access to the sign-off and see those standards and start completing those forms. We have looked at them recently, and we think we can improve them slightly. So we, in the next couple of weeks, we may start tweaking some of these forms just to try and improve them. So maybe if you want to look, maybe go on now, but maybe not download until September, because we may make some improvements. But the centres that you're working with will hopefully go through these with you, so you've got an idea, but you can also gain access directly yourselves to have a look. So I'll try and get some of those links while we're chatting and just drop them in. So I'll just drop them in. So the one I've dropped in there is the main page for site carpentry. But if you go under resources, you'll see various trade areas, and you can just scroll down to documents, assessment documents, and it'll open up the employer sign-off document. So worth a glance at those. And what I'll also do, I noticed that you beat me to it, Jason. You've put the Skills for Wales email address on the slide there. So that's a good one to make a note of. Any questions after today? Please remain in touch. Are there any entry requirements that learners have to meet? There's no specified entry requirements. There's exit requirements, if you like. So to successfully complete the whole apprenticeship, there's certain requirements. So it's no different, I suppose, than before. Looking as an employer, be looking for suitable candidates. If they've achieved the grade as required for the apprenticeship in the Maths and English, then they wouldn't have to sit that alongside their apprenticeship. That sits outside of our role in supporting you with this trade qualification. So within the whole apprenticeship, there are often additional requirements. I would speak to your centre direct on what those are, and you can have a chat, and that might help you form an opinion on who will be a suitable candidate. But there's none specified. We just advise you consider it, and consider that they have the base skills, if you like, or are capable of achieving the qualification in the time to the best of your knowledge. I suppose it's no different than employing any other candidate. Can you see any more questions, Jason?
No, there's no more coming. I think that's the final one.
I will just drop in a contact us page. So there's a lot of details for contact there, should you want to do some follow-up after today's session. Okay, well, we'll not keep you all on if there's no further questions coming in. This has been really useful, some really good questions there. We know it's always difficult giving up your evening, so we do really appreciate you coming along and listening to this presentation. We hope it's been helpful. We're on this journey with you, so any queries, questions, feedback, please stay in touch with us. We'll help as much as we can. The more you ask us, the more we know where your pinch points are, so it helps us with future sessions. And if there's any change to documents, anything we can add that helps or improves, we can do that based on your feedback. So please do take just a couple of moments to complete that survey. And once again, thank you very much for your time, and thank you to my colleague Jason for hosting this as well. So enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone, and thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.